It started on a sweltering Tuesday morning, the kind where the sun rises angry and the cicadas scream louder than common sense, and I was tightening bolts on the new security fence by the edge of my lakefront ranch when my phone buzzed a message from my daughter, Haley, saying she'd landed early, picked up a rental SUV from the airport, and would be at the ranch within the hour, and little did either of us know that this quiet return home was about to set off a chain reaction that would rip through the local HOA like a wrecking ball through rotten wood. Because this wasn't just any HOA, this was the Lakeshore Haven Property Association, a wannabe private kingdom run by overpaid retirees and self-appointed security officers who treated every catcon, fence post, shrub, and mailbox as their personal jurisdiction, and I had been butting heads with them for years after refusing to join their HOA scam, winning in court multiple times to prove my land was deeded free and independent. But they never stopped trying to assert power this time, though they would go too far, and it would be the last mistake they ever made, because when Haley drove past the front gates and pulled into our gravel driveway, the HOA's new head of security enforcement, Ron Slade, saw the unfamiliar black SUV, panicked like a moron, and sent out a false trespassing alert to all patrol units, not knowing that the woman, Dat, stepping out of that vehicle wasn't just my daughter, but a decorated undercover FBI agent returning from an 18-month sting operation embedded in cartel logistics. She was tired, low-key, and trying to decompress. But when she noticed a man in a tactical vest pacing the neighbor's driveway with a walkie-talkie and a sidearm, she slowed her pace and scanned the scene like the professional she was, while I, still working behind the house, had no idea the situation was already escalating. Ron radioed in backup, claiming an armed and suspicious female had entered private HOA territory, and 2 more trucks arrived with self-proclaimed officers, none of them actual law enforcement, all of them carrying illegally modified pistols and acting like they were guarding the president, not pestering peaceful homeowners. Haley opened her trunk to grab her bag when the first of them stepped forward and barked, "Hands where I can see them," which made her pivot smoothly, arms raised just enough to de-escalate, but her body tense, calculating trajectories, scanning fingers, reading intent. And when another man unholstered a Glock and pointed it directly at her head, Haley's voice changed instantly. "Federal agent badge in left pocket, do not approach." But they didn't listen. Didn't believe her. Didn't even check her ID. Because HOA stupidity doesn't recognize federal law. And that's when she moved in a single trained motion. She crouched, pulled her FBI-issued Sig Sauer from bar. Her waistband, fired a warning round inches from the man's boots, and took a stance that said she could drop all 3 of them before they took a breath, and the entire street froze as the crack of the bullet echoed across the cul-de-sac, drawing out, "Neighbors?" Panicked dogs, and even more HOA muscle, this time with a golf cart-mounted speaker blaring. "Step down immediately, you are on private land." As if that mattered one bit, when a federal officer was being threatened. Heard the commotion and came running from behind the barn with my lever-action Winchester across my back and adrenaline in my throat. And what I saw made me stop in my tracks. My daughter, eyes locked, gun steady, facing off against 5 armed men pretending to be cops, while a few terrified neighbors recorded on their phones. I ran toward the scene screaming, "That's my daughter. What the hell do you think you're doing?" But they ignored me, focusing only on Haley, who remained calm, voice level, warning them again that they were interfering with a federal operation. And it wasn't until the real sirens wailed in the distance that things began to shift, because unbeknownst to them, Haley had already activated her panic signal, a hidden button on her watch that alerted her regional field office, and within minutes, 2 black SUVs marked only with government plates roared down the road, stopping so hard the tires smoked. And armed agents piled out, guns drawn, instantly shouting federal commands and ordering the HOA thugs to drop their weapons, which they finally did, trembling, confused, and red-faced as Haley slowly holstered her gun and raised her hands to show the arriving.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
Haley slowly holstered her gun and raised her hands to show the arriving team she was safe. And that's when Ron Slade, idiot-in-chief, tried to lie his way out, claiming he was just doing his job and didn't know she was law enforcement. But the lead agent didn't even blink before telling him, impersonating an officer and threatening a federal agent. "Congratulations! You're about to be famous." And Ron was immediately cuffed, read his rights, and shoved into the back of a black vehicle while the rest of the HOA goons were lined up and disarmed, their weapons tagged as evidence, and I just stood there, stunned. As Haley walked over and gave me a hug like it was any other day, saying, "Sorry about the chaos, Dad. I didn't even get to drop off my bags." And I laughed, not because it was funny, but because this was peak HOA madness, and the only way to survive it was to laugh or burn the place down over the next few hours. Agents swept the neighborhood, confiscating illegal firearms, fake ID, and surveillance footage that showed the HOA had been running a private militia under the guise of neighborhood watch, using HOA dues to buy tactical gear, radios, even a license plate scanner, and it turned out Haley's arrival had been the perfect trigger for a broader investigation they'd been building for months, as other agents began interviewing residents and exposing that the tacky HOA board, led by President Marsha Dempsey, had funneled over $200,000 into off-the-books accounts marked for security development, which really meant backyard hot tubs, personal bunny, landscaping, and even paying Slade under the table. And when Marcia finally rolled up to the chaos in her oversized golf cart, trying to act in control, Haley didn't even bother standing. She just handed her a subpoena, said, "You're not just done. You're buried." And that's when the neighbors, the ones who had been silent for months out of fear, started clapping, one by one, then all together, like a slow wave of justice rolling across a broken beach. And as I looked around, I realized we weren't just witnessing an arrest or an investigation. This was a reckoning. And my daughter, the little girl who once built forts in the hayloft and practiced martial arts in our barn, had become the sword of Canna, federal law. Cutting down the rotted roots of HOA tyranny in a single morning, the news vans arrived by noon, helicopters circled by 2, and by dusk, the entire HOA board was under federal lock, their office sealed, with FBI tape, and Haley and I sat on the porch sipping iced tea while she reviewed her notes and casually updated her field director over a secure line. And when I asked her if she ever expected to come home to this, she smiled, said, "Nope, but I kind of hoped they'd try something stupid." And I realized then that this wasn't just over. This was only the beginning of the cleanup, because what they uncovered in those financial records hinted at something even darker: kickbacks from local contractors, illegal surveillance, voter suppression in board elections, and whispers of a private HOA database tracking residents' political beliefs and family members. And while I processed all that, Haley stood up, stretched, and said, "Time to burn the rest of their little empire, and Babla and Kaya." Just like that. We went from ranchers to revolutionaries, ready to finish what the HOA started, and they had no idea the war was already lost, because the moment they pulled a weapon on Haley, they didn't just start a fight with one family. They ignited a federal firestorm backed by every law they never bothered to understand. And as the week unfolded, subpoenas rained like hail. IRS agents joined the audit. Digital forensics experts traced encrypted payments to offshore accounts connected to shady developers who were illegally influencing board decisions. And even the mayor's office had to issue a public statement disavowing any connection to the HOA's Autonomous Enforcement Wing, as they called it. And meanwhile, neighbors who'd once feared retaliation now gathered, freely, sharing evidence. Screenshots, emails, even covert recordings of HOA meetings where they discussed intimidating non-members, manipulating dues, and blocking property sales unless bribes were paid under the table. And as Haley compiled all this into a master case file, I realized the entire community was finally breathing again. The weight lifted, the fear evaporating. And it all started with one trigger-happy HOA goon pointing a gun at the wrong woman. my daughter, the agent. Storm they never saw coming. The sun had barely risen the next morning when Haley was already on the phone with the Bureau, briefing them on everything that had transpired and laying out her plan to finish dismantling what she called the most absurd and dangerous HOA operation she'd ever encountered. I stood at the kitchen window, sipping my coffee, watching her pace across the porch in that same calm, commanding stride she always had when lives were on the line. What struck me wasn't just that my daughter had come home, it was that she had come back sharper, stronger, and more relentless than ever, and now that she had opened the gates, there was no going back. The FBI had declared Lakeshore Haven a priority investigation zone, which meant not just local agents but federal teams were now combing through every file, call log, and surveillance feed connected to the HOA called Security Wing. Within 48 hours, 22 current and former HOA board members had been subpoenaed. 5 were arrested on the spot for obstruction and wire fraud, and the rest were in hiding, lawyering up with panic in their eyes. Haley, meanwhile, turned my barn into a full-blown command center, laptops on hay bales, satellite uplinks mounted under the rafters, and agents cycling through every hour to debrief, strategize, and launch data raids on local businesses that had partnered with the HOA's illicit operations. What we uncovered went far deeper than anyone expected. Shell companies posing as landscaping firms used to launder HOA funds, fake background checks sent to potential buyers to pressure them into selling at below market rates, secret kickbacks to realtors who steered properties to board-favored buyers, and a dark money trail that reached up to a real estate conglomerate based 2 states away. A group that specialized in hostile community takeovers through complicit HOA boards. Haley tracked every digital footprint, subpoenaed encrypted messages, and ran background investigations so detailed that even seasoned agents were stunned. She uncovered a covert surveillance operation inside the HOA's main clubhouse, a wall of hidden hard drives filled with illegally obtained audio from homeowners' backyard conversations, bugged phone calls, and even drone footage hovering over properties that had refused to join the HOA. This wasn't just financial abuse, it was a civil rights violation on a scale that shocked everyone. The town's mayor, who initially tried to deflect, was caught red-handed in email chains approving off-record funding for the HOA's public safety trials, including greenlighting the use of unlicensed tasers and false impersonation of officers. When collared during a press conference, he tried to claim ignorance until Haley dropped a packet of documents on the podium mid-speech and calmly said, "Then maybe you can explain your signature here, here, and here." The mayor's face turned white, and within days, he resigned under federal investigation. The sheriff's office, embarrassed by their lack of oversight, began collaborating with the Bureau, releasing decades' worth of complaints about HOA harassment.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Bureau, releasing decades' worth of complaints about HOA harassment that had never been followed up on. Thousands of pages revealed a pattern of targeting minorities, disabled homeowners, veterans, and anyone who refused to fall in line. Fines, threats, even property liens used as weapons. Haley also discovered something far more sinister: secret HOA training camps set up in neighboring states. These weren't just retreats or seminars. They were paramilitary-style boot camps where HOA security enforcers trained with real weapons, learned tactical entries, and studied military-grade crowd control techniques. One camp, funded through HOA slush accounts, operated under the name Community Readiness Institute and was staffed by a former dishonorably discharged contractor. Video from a drone captured uniformed men practicing home entries, identifying targets, and shouting HOA bylaws like war chants. That discovery alone triggered a nationwide panic. Haley wasted no time. She formally requested and was granted emergency authorization to lead a federal task force. Within 3 days, a dozen more HOA chapters across the country were raided. Documents, computers, and entire servers were seized. Arrests piled up, including several regional directors who were orchestrating a plan to expand the road HOA model into other suburban communities. The media frenzy that followed was relentless. News vans parked along our rural road. Journalists from as far as DC camped outside the general store hoping for interviews. One morning, Haley sat for a nationally televised segment outlining how HOAs had evolved in some towns from community boards to private tyrannies. The segment sparked national outrage. Victims from across the country called in, forming digital coalitions and support networks. Haley began consulting with state legislators who asked for her help in drafting new HOA oversight laws. She also faced threats. One night, someone shot out our mailbox. Another time, an anonymous note was left on my truck windshield that read, "Back off, or bury her." The Bureau increased her protection detail, but Haley refused to be intimidated. Instead, she doubled down, launching public awareness webinars and organizing in-person seminars for towns facing similar HOA overreach. She wasn't just dismantling a corrupt group, she was building a movement. One of the most emotional moments came during a memorial ceremony organized for homeowners who had lost their properties to fraudulent HOA foreclosures. The stories were heartbreaking. An elderly widow forced from her home over $50 in unpaid dues. A family who returned from a funeral to find their locks changed. A disabled veteran whose custom-modified home had been seized and flipped without warning. Haley listened to every speaker, hugged every survivor, and at the end, presented each family with a formal acknowledgement from the Department of Justice, recognizing their suffering. But not everything could be fought with warrants. One of the hardest days came when Haley had to confront Mr. and Mrs. Templeton elderly neighbors, who had always brought cookies on the holidays, who'd helped my wife when she was sick, and who we thought were just sweet. Retirees. Turns out, they were deeply embedded in the HOA board, and had quietly turned over information on neighbors, their finances, visitor logs, security codes, in exchange for reduced dues and power. Haley met with them on the porch, no handcuffs, no badge, just 2 chairs and a hard conversation. I stood nearby as she asked why. Mrs. Templeton cried. Mr. Templeton said he thought it was helping. But Haley made it clear their actions had caused real harm. What followed was one of the most remarkable moments of the entire case. The Templetons went public. They admitted what they had done on live television, apologized to their neighbors, and agreed to be witnesses for the prosecution. That moment cracked something open. Dozens of others came forward. HOA enforcement.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Something open. Dozens of others came forward. HOA enforcers who had doubts, residents who had stayed silent, contractors who'd taken shady deals. The town became a flood of truth. And Haley, through it all, kept the focus not on vengeance, but on justice. Then came the town hall meeting. Haley walked in with 2 agents flanking her, a leather folder in one hand and a USB drive in the other. She stood before the room, packed wall to wall with angry residents, reporters, and a few red-faced board members who hadn't been arrested yet, and calmly laid out the evidence: embezzlement, fraud, extortion, intimidation, all committed under the guise of community maintenance. She played audio, shared screenshots, described the surveillance networks hidden in plain sight. The room erupted. Marcia Dempsey was arrested in front of the crowd. The rest of the board resigned in disgrace. The aftermath was a wave. HOA chapters across the country came under scrutiny. Legislation passed in 3 states within weeks to limit HOA powers. Haley testified before Congress, where she stood, unwavering, and said, "Neighborhoods should never be policed by the corrupt. Americans deserve more than gated tyranny." Back at the ranch, the community began to heal. A new neighborhood council was formed. No dues, no mandates, only volunteers and transparency. We planted flowers where surveillance posts used to stand. Kids biked freely again. A neighborhood mural was painted on the side of the community center, showing a phoenix rising over shattered chains, and in the center, Haley in her bureau jacket, not as a hero, but as a neighbor who stood up. And then, just as we were hosting a potluck dinner to celebrate the new chapter, a black SUV pulled into our driveway. Out stepped a Secret Service agent. He handed Haley an envelope. It was a letter signed by the President of the United States. In it, he thanked her for her service, called her actions an example of courage, integrity, and what it means to protect liberty on American soil. The letter said, "You didn't just enforce the law, you reminded a nation what justice looks like." Haley folded the letter, looked around at the neighbors laughing and talking behind her, and simply said, "They won't come back. Not here. Not again." That night, under the stars, we lit a bonfire by the lake. People told stories. They danced. They laughed. A local guitarist played a song written just for the occasion called "No More Fences." And my daughter, who had walked into a quiet ranch driveway and faced down armed imposters, now sat with a marshmallow on a stick, smiling as peace returned, earned, defended, and built by her own 2 hands. And in that moment, I knew the battle wasn't just won. It was over. And freedom had come home.